with the board position of your chosen weather setter is really, really important.
So let's get into game one here in round 4 with Joe Ugarte and Ian Holdeman. Ian on the top of your screen with Zacian and Incineroar, and Joe with Grimmsnarl, Groudon. Something that Gabby and I mentioned, Adam, was that Groudon, if it's holding an Assault Vest, can be really strong in its special defense. And then with a Grimmsnarl who potentially has Light Screen and Reflect, it can take attacks even better.
Grimmsnarl has been ever present for a while now, being able to provide so much help for its team. And if you leave it alone and let it set up those screens, yes, you can be going after its partner Pokemon, in this case the Groudon, but you're just not getting the knockouts. And even though the Groudon's been intimidated, Incineroar doing what it does, it's still going to put down a lot of damage, especially when those hits are super effective or it's being boosted by the harsh sunlight. So a lot of work we put in there. The Grimmsnarl leaving though, not trying to do any of the setup that it usually likes to work on.
Gastrodon will switch into that Grimmsnarl slot for Joe. And then on the other end, there is Kyogre. So Joe correctly predicting a switch out from the Incineroar, which is obviously a scary prediction to make on turn 1 because Incineroar does have access to fake out. So if you could have potentially been fake outed on that turn, but won't be punished for that. Instead, Behemoth Blade into Gastrodon does not do much damage. That's one of the best parts with Gastrodon. Obviously, it walls Kyogre thanks to its ability, its Storm Drain ability, but it also resists Behemoth Blade. So Precipice Blades does connect onto both of Ian's Pokemon and brings them down to about half.
Very solid turn from Joe, getting a bit of a switch while both trainers switching, and we'll address Ian's side in a minute. But the Groudon looking like it would have to leave. It had been intimidated, it's not getting knockouts as we can see from the damage it puts down, but leaving it in to hit that Precipice Blades anyway starts to rack up the damage. Gastrodon a very safe switch in though. Took the Behemoth Blade very, very nicely, definitely took it better than a Grimmsnarl would, and is able to start recovering immediately. So putting himself in a solid position there. The Gastrodon poses a problem for, of course, the Kyogre. It's not going to be able to put damage down using its water attacks onto that Gastrodon. So just has to be a little bit careful about how he plays this turn. I think the Zacian, getting the Kyogre in great. You've obviously got control of the weather on Ian's side, and that is a favorable weather when you're facing down the Groudon, forcing this decision out of Joe. And it's up to Ian to capitalize on this in this turn. The momentum swing is available for him, and he's got to grab it this turn.
Grimmsnarl switching into the Groudon slot, and Gastrodon going for Protect, so a very defensive turn out of Joe here. Play Rough from the Zacian will go into the Protect, and then Ice Beam out of Kyogre also goes into, so a beautiful Protect from Gastrodon there on that turn, because Ian was definitely going for the double target to try to knock out Gastrodon so that Kyogre would be free to use its water attacks again.
Not picking up any of the momentum he was looking for. A fantastic Protect from Joe there. That Gastrodon getting a little more recovery as well. It's not back to full yet, but it's going to get there if it can keep weaving in these turns. And now the Groudon is in the back, the Groudon is safe, the Groudon is not fighting in the rain as well. It's always going to be a potential switch in, which Ian has to think about going into this turn. Do I leave the Kyogre in? Do I let the Kyogre try and capitalize on control of the weather? Or you don't want to get caught short as the Kyogre player, as somebody who plays Kyogre. You know, you don't want to be in the weather against you when you're just not doing any damage, or doing limited damage at least.
Ian switching Kyogre out into the Zapdos, so revealing Ian's 4th Pokemon here in game 1. Then the Play Rough, thanks to Grimmsnarl, is not going to do much damage to Gastrodon, and instead this Earth Power, super effective into Zacian, will be enough to pick up the KO there. So now Ian down to the 3 Pokemon there, and it really looks like Joe has not lost any momentum whatsoever. This Gastrodon just keeps hanging on the field and being very threatening against Ian's team.
This Gastrodon poses a lot of problems over onto Ian's side. We've already seen all 4 of the Pokemon throughout this game. Now the Zapdos has showed up as well. The Zapdos doesn't really have many options to deal with the Gastrodon. Can't be using any of those super effective electric type attacks. Incineroar, yeah, it can fake it out, it can buy some time. But what I think Joe is really trying to do here is force him into a position where that Kyogre has to come in as one of the back 2, and then you can just bring the Groudon in and go to town. And even better as well, that Incineroar's come in with a very low impact Intimidate. Now Ian is going to have to start thinking about maybe switching, maybe preserving it a little bit. And while you're doing all of that, well, we talk so much about board position and what these trainers have available to them. The Grimmsnarl's just setting up. The Grimmsnarl's going absolutely wild. We've seen the Reflect. it's going to be able to set up another screen potentially if that's what he wants, you know, knows what's in the back. There are, of course, special attackers available, so maybe a light screen would be nice to round out the rest of the game. You know, you've got the reflect to make it through. Definitely going to need a light screen, though, if the Zapdos is about to put down a big old damage.
Yep, the beauty of light screen and reflect, especially with Grimmsnarl holding a light clay as its held item, will make those moves last for 8 turns instead of 5. Of course, he can't get the light screen this turn because Incineroar does target the Grimmsnarl, so he can't go for it thanks to the fake out. And max airstream from Zapdos is not enough to knock out the Grimmsnarl. Does bring it very low, will increase the speed on both Zapdos and Incineroar by 1 stage, revealing Life Orb, which is definitely a very common item on Zapdos nowadays. But then the Yawn from Gastrodon, that's again just a very pesky Pokemon that Joe has with that well-timed Protect, with a Reflect up so it can tank a hit from Zacian. With the Yawn, now at the end of next turn, Zapdos will be put to sleep after its next attack. This Gastrodon has just been so clutch for Joe.
A little bit interesting looking at Ian's turn there. Yes, you want to get the Grimmsnarl taken off the field so you don't have to deal with the potential light screen to round out the game, but leaving the Gastrodon alone is a very bold play, as considering the amount of problems it's already caused, you can't just leave it, because it's going to either take knockouts as it did on the Zacian, or yawn you and put you to sleep at the end of this turn like it has done to the Zapdos. That Zapdos is Dynamax. It is going to be the focal point for Ian to try and close out this game, and it's guaranteed to miss the last turn of its Dynamax because it's going to have to be taking a nap. So a lot of work being put in by the Gastrodon, who deserves the break it's getting here, I think.
And I was going to mention, with that Protect, because you didn't knock out Grimmsnarl, that fake out really just passed the buck off 1 turn because of Protect, Gastrodon hangs on with 9 HP as Light Screen through the crit. Light Screen is able to set up, so your fake out last turn really didn't negate Grimmsnarl's effectiveness because it just went 1 turn later. And now the Light Screen and Reflect are up on Joe's end of the field. But Parting Shot went into the Protect in that spot, so it was not able to switch out.
Nope, not able to leave the field, and any momentum Ian wanted to try and build by bringing in that Kyogre for a quick turnaround, really gone. Now you're stuck on the field with an Incineroar that, yes, it can do some damage, yes, it would pick up a knockout on the Gastrodon or the Grimmsnarl, but the Zapdos isn't doing anything. So in this turn, Joe, yes, he's got 2 very, very low Pokemon, but he's still got all 4 available. It's 3 to 4, but then when you sort of look at the Zapdos that's asleep, it's like 2.5 to 4. And Joe has really been controlling this game very, very nicely. The Gastrodon has put in a lot of work. Maybe time to retire it, get in that Groudon again, or reveal the 4th Pokemon. And the Grimmsnarl set up both its screens, so its core job is done, and now it is able to start playing around with some of its other options. It has the 6 move slot syndrome. We all know that there's a lot of different moves it can learn, and if you're in Ian's shoes, you probably want to figure out what they are right now in game 1. You don't want to learn in game 3 the bad lesson. The Scary Face, I absolutely love this choice. All of those max airstreams removed.
Completely negated there, as Scary Face will harshly lower Zapdos' speed, bringing it back down to neutral speed. And now this attack finally will be enough to knock out the Gastrodon. So if you think about it, Gastrodon switched in on turn 1. It was really on the field for a very long time. So a very effective use of the Sea Slug Pokemon, which is what it's known as. I looked that up once, just saying. Zacian with the Intrepid Sword will boost its attack by 1 stage. And then now that Zapdos has been asleep, used its 3rd turn of Dynamax there. Not a lot of strong offensive output for Ian. And of course, you have to really bank on waking up as well.
If Zapdos doesn't wake up, this turn could really lock up the game, essentially, for Joe. The Zacians come in completely uncontested on that boost. Usually you want to get the Incineroar in to try and deal with it, but the Incineroar doesn't get knocked out, and this is exactly what he needed.
Heat Wave connects onto both, will knock out the Grimmsnarl, brings Zacian down to half HP. The Incineroar, a huge survive there at 2 HP, because now he can go for the Flare Blitz, super effective into Zacian, and that will not be enough to knock it out. Actually, doesn't get a burn either. I was thinking of Heat Wave and Flare Blitz having both the chance to burn Zacian. That would have been very helpful for Ian. But Zacian hangs on, so Joe must have invested in some bulk there on the Zacian to take 2 fire attacks in 1 turn.
No, and now we get to see confirmation on how these abilities interact. This is absolutely crucial for both of these players. Kyogre's Drizzle going first means this is going to be a really bad endgame for Kyogre, because Groudon's Drought immediately counters it out. I think if you took the Zacian out, maybe things could be a little bit different, but Joe is in such a good position with control of the weather right now. Of course, you have handed over a little bit of help to that Zapdos Heat Wave, but the Zapdos isn't as fast as it needs to be, as it was looking to be after those max airstreams. So this final turn really should decide, and I think Groudon not being able to take certain types of damage from the Zapdos, limiting those move selections, really could be a tough one. The Zacian as well, obviously exceptionally fast, obviously able to just lay down the damage needed to help Groudon if there's any knockouts he's worried he's not going to get.
Finally, Joe Ugarte will Dynamax this turn with the Groudon, so it's going to gain double HP and have the access to stronger attacks with secondary effects. Also want to note the Grimmsnarl, because it got Light Screen and Reflect Up, is what let Zacian take both a Heat Wave, a special attack, and Flare Blitz, a physical attack. So very important that Grimmsnarl got those moves set up. Protect from Zapdos as well as a Protect on Kyogre's end. So Ian, very defensive here, will not have any offensive output. Zacian revealing Play Rough into the Zapdos slot there, and the Max Quake into Kyogre will still hit it, but the damage will be mitigated thanks to the Protect.
It'll be mitigated, but that special defense boost really, I think, locks up the game extra for Joe. Both of these Pokemon struggle to deal reliable physical damage. They're special attackers by nature, and now the Groudon behind the light screen, even if there was an owl, I just don't see that getting knocked out. Yes, you might be able to pick off the Zacian, but not before it lands a Behemoth Blade or a Sacred Sword in this case, just going for it on the Kyogre. Just wrapping it up, I think this Zapdos isn't going to be able to do anything.
Critical hit, Sacred Sword into Kyogre, knocks it out, and then Heat Wave from Zapdos. Zacian avoids anyway, so can't even get the knockout there. Does not do too much damage to Groudon, doesn't get a burn either, and then Max Rockfall from Groudon into Zapdos will be able to clean it up there, so that will be a clean Game 1 victory for Joe Ugarte.
Saving both those restricteds for the back, using those support pairings that we talk about, those Pokemon that don't deal the damage, but they set up Reflects, they set up Light Screens, or they just try and buy you a little bit of time, because Joe could just run the same kind of idea back and just get Game 2 and not even send us to Game 3.
Ian Holdeman trying to force a Game 3 in this set in round 4 here. Both of these trainers are 3-0, so there are 8 rounds. If you lose 1 round here, you can still win out and then make it into Top Cut, but you really want to continue this momentum that they had early on here in the tournament. Zapdos, Zacian for Ian, and then the Incineroar Gastrodon for Joe.
Getting the Incineroar Intimidate down onto Zacian immediately is exactly what you want. You don't want that boost to just sit on the field and help out. You want to be able to get that Intimidate down, and that's something that a lot of players are cottoned onto. Really nice lead from Joe, knew how much the Gastrodon could do, and seeing, well, maybe he's going to have to make an adjustment, maybe he's going to have to, really lean on that Zacian nice and early, so I'll bring my Incineroar. Really not like how that's played out for Joe. Ian, of course, not in a bad position. He does have 2 more offensive Pokemon on the board in Zapdos and Zacian compared to that Incineroar and Gastrodon. It's just more damage available, but Joe's in the position to switch and see how much he can take. His Zacian comes in, gets the Intrepid Sword, and holds on to its boost as well.
Ian protecting Zapdos here on turn 1, so in case a Yawn potentially went into that slot, that will not work, but instead Gastrodon will protect as well. Great call as Zacian on Ian's end went for a Play Rough into that slot. So now Joe has gotten his Zacian onto the field with no damage, and then the Gastrodon is also still at full HP.
And the Gastrodon's in a great position to try and yawn it this turn. If you know Ian wants to Dynamax the Zapdos and focus on that a little bit like he did in game number 1, then just yawn it right away. Just try and deal with it as soon as possible. The Gastrodon's not threatened by it, but nice to just buy that time. Don't need to give up free damage there. Maybe if you were Joe, you could have tried to weave in something like the Earth Power, just to try and get a little bit of damage down, but you would have taken a lot more in retaliation. And I think that's the smarter play. If you were really trying to push the needle from turn number 1, then you would want to land the damage. But knowing the board, knowing how this goes, you've just got to be smart about it. And that Zacian forced out, it's just not in the most solid position since that Intimidate drop in turn number 1.
You also don't want to risk a potential speed tie, right? With the two Zacians, you don't know how your opposing trainer's Zacian is trained in speed, so potentially you would be taking a Behemoth Blade into that slot too. So a very smart switch from Ian to switch into Kyogre here, set up the rain, and then now it's time for Zapdos to Dynamax. It has Life Orb. It's a very strong Pokemon. Zapdos has really come into its own in Series 12 as a vital option for Dynamaxing on a lot of teams because of the pure strength that it has. And unless I'm crazy, Zacian is unable to Dynamax, so this means we are getting a Dynamax Gastrodon out of Joe.
That is exactly what we've got. It's ready to start playing. Gastrodon was so useful in game number 1, and I feel at the end, maybe I'm mistaken, just thinking back to game 1, Dynamaxing the Groudon was just a confirmation of the victory. But the Gastrodon did just as much work, so why doesn't it just try and take those hits and, you know, do a little bit more? I really like this from Joe, and I'm excited to see what move he's locked in with it. Max
Airstream from Zapdos into the Gastrodon. That's going to let it take the extra hits because of the double HP that Dynamax allows it to have. The Behemoth Blade did bring Kyogre down to half of its HP, so that will raise the speed, though, of both of Ian's Pokemon. Max Quake, though, from Gastrodon into the Kyogre slot. This double target into that slot. Is it enough for a KO? No, it's not. Kyogre just barely hangs on in the red. That is not what Joe was looking for, but great turn out of Ian because now he has the speed boost on both Kyogre and Zacian, Kyogre and Zapdos, so they should be faster than Zacian.
But the Gastrodon got the special defense boost, which means another Max Airstream would, definitely be able to go into that Gastrodon and it not be too worried. The Dynamax call, absolutely huge. Before the leftovers recovery, I did look, and I believe it was just at that halfway mark, so it would have been very treacherous to think about it. But this Gastrodon, obviously wanted to try and land that Earth Power, wanted to try and make sure that Earth Power was going into the Zacian. But the Max Lightning can only go one way, so this Gastrodon's kind of being left alone for this turn. And we'll see what the Kyogre can do in response.
And Kyogre does not switch out, right? A Pokemon that cannot use its water attacks as long as Gastrodon is on the field, thanks to Storm Drain. The Origin Pulse, I guess it can technically use it if you're going to use a wide attack, but you are boosting Gastrodon's damage by increasing its special attack by 1 stage. Ooh. The Origin Pulse, not enough. Zacian hangs on yet again. No light screen needed in this matchup as this Behemoth Blade will connect into the Zapdos. Double damage onto a Dynamax Pokemon, brings Zapdos down very low. Does get a static, though, onto the Zacian, which is huge because it might get paralyzed. It might not be able to attack next turn. And then Max Hailstorm, that's the Ice Beam that Gastrodon's commonly use. They don't really use Scald because they don't need it. Instead, they use Ice Beam to hit flying types, just like Zapdos, setting up the Hail and knocking out Zapdos.
Taking away the rain with it too. That's huge for meaning this Kyogre's kind of left a little bit stranded. Even with the rain, an Origin Pulse didn't get the knockout on the only target it could hit on the field in the Zacian. That's that special defense boost from Max Quake coming through and proving vital. Of course, the Hail does take the Zacian out. This Gastrodon's got another turn of Dynamax to play with, and he's already felled the opposing Dynamax. So this is the turn, I think, where Joe can start to turn the screw a little bit and make sure that Gastrodon puts down a huge amount of damage. The choices to switch in for Ian, not looking too great. The Zacian doesn't want to come in and take a Max Quake. That's just ruled out. Is it the Incineroar in the back? Well, that's not going to appreciate the Max Quake either. And then you get a little bit sticky on what to work around. So it's an Incineroar for Joe. And the Whimsicott, we did talk about this, like this adaptation.
The Incineroar, the Intimidate's not going to matter here, but more importantly, it does have Fake Out access. We see Kyogre has 6 HP, so it is low enough. And it's not like Kyogre can just wait out the Fake Out because it will get knocked out by the Hail next turn if it goes for a Protect. So Kyogre in a very difficult position here. Do you want to potentially switch it out into your Zacian on this turn? Because then if Whimsicott goes for a Tailwind here, either Whimsicott or Zacian switches out, Kyogre can come back in with the Tailwind though.
Oh, well, Incineroar not opting to Fake Out this turn. Just getting that Groudon in immediately. Probably feeling pretty confident in its ability to control the weather. Did get rid of that hail, though, which would have been the thing to knock out Kyogre. But the Origin Pulse, once again, powering up the Gastrodon. In the sun, it should still hurt the Groudon.
It is super effective, but because we talked about how you can train it, it's super in its special defense. Even the Energy Ball, thanks to the Max Quake from the first turn of Dynamax, is not enough for a full-time super effective attack to knock out the Gastrodon. And yet another knockout will be claimed. Critical hit brings it down to its Focus Sash, but because of the hail, it's going to knock out both of these Pokemon. So now, if you're counting at home, Gastrodon knocked out his own teammate from hail. Now it's just a menace, knocking out Kyogre and Whimsicott thanks to the Max Hailstorm residual damage as well. This has just been a master showcase out of what Gastrodon is able to do in Series 12, where many trainers believe it is one of the stronger Pokemon available in the meta because of exactly this situation.
Well, that's so nicely done from Joe. Starts out with the weather as hail, brings in the Groudon to bring it to sunlight. That meant the Origin Pulse didn't hurt, and it did a little bit less than I was expecting on the Groudon personally. So the Groudon takes that hit absolutely beautifully. That's wonderful news if you're the Groudon. Being able to take that Origin Pulse, you of course gave over another special attack boost to this Gastrodon. And then the Gastrodon gets to reset hail while setting Whimsicott up for the knockout on its Focus Sash, and the Kyogre was already there. So super nicely done from the Gastrodon. Groudon leaving the field, even though it has a very good matchup against the Zacian. The Incineroar, more important, but you can't give up the boosts on this Gastrodon. It's so strong right now.
No, definitely. And the Incineroar just playing it safe again. Joe is in a really commanding position, but understands you got to play to every out just in case. Now that Zacian is unable to switch out, that Intrepid Sword boost is negated thanks to Intimidate, and he is at neutral attack, so you can't really raise the attack stat anymore. So now you are free to bring back Groudon, the Wish Granter, and Joe's wish is to win this set here and move on to 4-0. And right now it's looking very likely.
There's nothing that Ian can do with just the Zacian here. The Groudon is going to be able to control the weather. The Incineroar is obviously in play to cause some problems, as it does, and I just don't see any way Zacian could clutch this out. Buying time, though, with the Protect is the only real option just to make it through this Fake Out turn.
Right, Fake Out from Incineroar, and then, of course, Heat Crash revealed on Groudon. Sometimes it is good to know. Obviously, we wouldn't have known earlier if it was a Dynamax attack, but with Groudon, you can use Fire Punch, you can use Heat Crash. There's different fire attacks, so that still was nice for Ian to know, but ultimately it will that Protect won't really have mattered too much, as the Sacred Sword does not pick up a KO, no critical hit, which would have been needed to knock out the Incineroar, but Heat Crash brings Zacian down to half of its HP, and then Flare Blitz will be able to clean it up here. So Joe Ugarte with a very clean 2-0 here in Swiss round 4, and will be moving on, still undefeated going into the latter half of this tournament.
Really nicely played in both games of the set. They were two very, very different games in the way that they played out. In game number 1, Joe played around the grid.